So I'd like to discuss some words that we might want to use a little bit more from now on. So Canadian news broadcast, if we get this article up here, CBC, have compiled a small list of words which they deem may be hurtful to various groups in virtue of their specific historical and cultural content. If we scroll down a little bit, we can actually see some examples. I don't think this is all of them.
Grandfathered in.
Grandfathered in.
Lame.
Mm.
Spirit animal.
Mm.
Tone deaf.
Yes, all of
Black sheep.
All of these words were submitted by their readers and journalists who are Black, Indigenous, and people of colour.
Brainstorm?
Yeah. Okay. See, what they've done is decided to run these words by so-called anti-racism and language experts.
Right, okay.
One being Ai Taniguchi, a linguist and an associate language studies professor with the University of Toronto, who says that being an English speaker doesn't entail that you necessarily know the racist etymology automatically.
No, and I don't care what the racist etymology of blindsided is.
Yes, so the English people need to be taught properly how to use English. She acknowledges, or is it he or she acknowledges, that obliviousness to the etymology doesn't automatically make you a bad person. So that's good, quite right. And
well,
it shows
lucky for us.
It shows why this entire article is pointless from the very start.
Yeah.
But she proceeds to say that She proceeds to say this, or is it he or she? I really have no idea. They. I didn't know it was racist does not eliminate the pain of the hearer. As language users, we have the social responsibility to monitor the impacts our utterances have on others, especially when it involves a marginalised group.
No. Now what? I refuse.
So not knowing the context of the word, of course, doesn't make you a bad person. Every rational person knows this to be true. It's equally true that a person who takes offence may have misinterpreted the language being used, or more specifically, the intention of the user, and thus taken offence from nothing. So where this is going to go... Which is
what I think is a summary of all of
this. I mean, shall we just get straight to what they're actually saying about the words? So let's start with blackmail, blacklist, and black sheep. So the issue here is that these are all negative terms, says Joseph Smith, an anti-racism.
Nothing to do with race.
But it connotes evil, distrust, lack of intelligence, ignorance, a lack of beauty, I imagine, and the absence of white.
That's not what it means.
Not so subtle race baiting here.
That's not what it means, you liars. This lowering of blackness on the spectrum with regards to value was developed further in the wake of the transatlantic slave trade. Nice reach.
Yes. Well, for a start, I'd wonder what spectrum do they have in mind, I wonder. Sounds almost like he's pointing to a caste system, which would figure, because that seems to be what the intersectionalists want.
I mean, before the English-speaking people ever met a black person, they described someone who was evil as black-hearted. To blackmail someone was described as blackmail. To put someone on a blacklist or be the black sheep of the family is nothing to do with race. It was to do with bad. Just that's it.
Yes, yeah, that it wasn't exclusively essentially about race. But the next bit is quite interesting. Black became associated with a particular group of people, and that group of people received all that negative connotation. That's why we try to move away from these kinds of terms. Well, that was certainly true at one time.
Maybe.
But is this the case now?
No.
No. I mean, blackness for the last couple of decades has pretty much been a descriptive term used predominantly in cultural criticism by black people in an overwhelmingly positive way in the last 5 years or so.
But this is important though, because there are different senses in which words are transmitted, and what they're suggesting is that there aren't. If I were to say, God, I don't have a ready example, but there are senses in which words like there. Which way am I using the word there in isolation? You don't know. There are lots of different senses, and it requires the context of the rest of the sentence to know what I'm saying when I say the word there. Am I saying over there, or there is, or there possessively? There are lots of different ways of saying a word that sounds in one particular way. And so the idea that they can just sit there and go, well, that word is bad. Blackmail has black in it. Yeah, but what sense am I using it in? Am I using it to refer to a black person? Then no, then shut up.
Language, when completely severed from the intention of how the word is applied, is completely impotent.
Yes.
But this is basically an attempt to give words almost metaphysical causality.
Yeah, well, I think this comes from Frege, actually, and his semantics that I've been studying recently for some reason. So what they're trying to do is essentially trying to find an objective meaning of a sentence decontextualized from the speaker. Yeah, but we can't use that word, John. Michael. Yeah, maybe you can, but we can't. But no, they're trying to find like an objective way of understanding a sentence outside of a context. And the thing is, such a thing just isn't possible. Again, like even if you'd say like the cat is sat on the mat, maybe I'm using that as like a code to say I've got someone behind me with a gun to my back, and you don't know. It might be deliberately incoherent, but you wouldn't know from just taking the words out of context and trying to ascribe to them an objective meaning. And even then, there are so many presuppositions based on that. Who knows? So this is total nonsense. Sorry, and I'm going.
No, it's a massive regress, isn't it? But what do you think of the term blacklist in particular?
Well, I don't think it means black people.
No. No. I mean, it's the claim here is that the term black has a negative connotation, but actually there are examples where the opposite is true. Well, not least because of course you can have a positive understanding of black culture, but also or like Black American Express card. Like that only has overwhelmingly positive connotations unless you are a Marxist and you hate capitalism. To have a Black American Express card means that you are quite literally amongst the most privileged people in society.
But has anyone pointed out that sounds similar to blackmail, and perhaps that's bad?
Well, someone would point that out, and they would be moronic to do so.
They would.
They would. Shall we move on to ghetto and inner city?
Yes.
Yes. The Smith says terms like ghetto and inner city grew out of the Industrial Revolution in North America. The word ghetto also has a painful historical root in Europe during the Holocaust and was likely derived from Jewish settlements in Italy centuries ago. Ghettos and inner cities were typically seen to be places where less refined people lived, the people who weren't up to date culturally, development-wise, he said.
Okay. Correct.
Yes. But does that immediately mean that the people who use the term ghetto in ghettos are participating in the problem?
I've failed to believe there is a problem. If we need to define an area in a city where people aren't up to date culturally, development-wise, we're going to call it a ghetto.
Yeah.
If people are upset by that, too bad.
Well, the American, should say, cultural content that I'm familiar with involves using the term ghetto relatively frequently, and it's not entirely negative. Sometimes it's positive. Like sometimes they actually refer to these places and almost as a place of home.
Well, that's because it is where their home is, and they call it ghetto music, ghetto culture, ghetto fashion.
Yeah,
and this is cool and new and subversive.
So where I imagine they're actually trying to go with this is saying, well, because obviously that they would say counter to that oh no, it's fine in that context, but it's just the whiteys can't say it.
So now that exactly, but now the context matters. You see,
yes, the context
now it can't
matters
just be taken out of context and be given an objective definition of meaning.
So this is complete rubbish. So if we move on to spooky, which was of course discussed very, very recently. Yes, apparently the term spook used to refer to a ghost, spite, or something that's strange. Well, no, I'll rephrase that. The term spook has a history of being an anti-black slur when white soldiers began calling fellow black soldiers spooks during World War II. Now, I had no idea this happened.
No, this is American imperialism. The words spook and spooky are going to doubtless go back into the mists of time in medieval England and beyond. And I don't care what they do in America about it. When we talk about spook and spooky, we mean ghosts and things like that in Halloween and things like that.
Yes, and I will
don't care about your opinions.
Yes, and I will continue to use the term spooky in that precise manner.
Yes.
Screw your feelings.
How many black people know that?
Almost none.
Yeah, how many black people know that? This is what the anti-black slur that American soldiers.
I imagine even less of them actually care.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the next one is actually quite funny though. This is sold down the river.
Okay, I can guess where.
Yes, and apparently it has always literally been the process of selling a slave down the river during the transatlantic slave trade, as if this process has never happened at any other point in history.
Well, I mean, there were lots of people sold down rivers all over Europe by the Vikings.
Yes.
Just in case that's something we're allowed to point
but to sell someone down the river must be directly related to the transatlantic slave trade, commonly used to express betrayal.
Again, another American imposition on us.
Yes. So let's move on to grandfathered in.
How is that an offensive phrase?
I'd never actually heard of it, but apparently, it modernly refers to someone or a business being exempt from new rules and continue operating as is. It dates back to a 19th century policy called the Grandfather Clause, which indirectly stops Black Americans from voting by limiting eligibility to only those whose ancestors could vote. Again, I had no idea. I'm pretty
and
sure.
I very much doubt anyone in the modern era knows that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, well, again, I think as we can probably see by this point, so bloody what?
Yeah.
even if that is the case, if we're seriously going to go back to, if we're going to embark on tracing every single word back to its oppressive foundations, and I'm pretty sure you could find some microaggression in something. We're going to have to do this with quite literally every word that has ever existed.
I just refuse flat categorically to be language police like this.
Yes.
Do not care. If you're offended by any of these words, go cry about it.
Yes. Can we move down to Brainstorm? It's a little bit further down because
okay, hang on, let me see if I can guess. Brainstorm.
Who's this going to offend?
So this is going to be surrounding the concept of neurodivergence.
It says.
Yes.
It's offensive for the brain damaged.
So for every leftist activist,
yes.
This is an offensive term. Right?
This, as you rightly said, this has been pointed out by the neurodiversity movement, despite the fact that the neurodiversity movement itself does not recognise the idea of a damaged brain.
Yeah, that all brains are equal, surely.
There are no disabilities, only differences.
But
that's literally their position.
Even then, brainstorm is not a negative or pejorative term. Like a brainstorming session is where everyone gets around, thinks about things, throws out ideas, and tries to figure out whatever the subject is they're talking about. It's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. It's not pejorative. It's not saying, oh, you're an idiot or your brain is damaged or anything like that.
Yeah, but there's an implied judgment that brain damaged people can't brainstorm, which would of course depend on how they're damaged, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they're literally unable to communicate, then I guess maybe. But if they're unable to communicate, how did they get offended by it in the first place? But no, I don't think there's any implication in there that brainstorm means that brain damaged people can't participate.
Yeah. I mean, it gets pretty just desperate and boring from this point. I mean, dumb and lame.
Which are just ancient terms that mean you can't speak and you can't walk.
Yes. I mean, dumb is of course, well, the actual definition is, well, someone who can't speak.
Yes.
And it's now used to refer to someone who isn't particularly bright or intelligent or whatever. And apparently the offence here is basically when someone is accused of being, well, I suppose this is the case of lame, actually, someone who's boring or unexciting. But that's got nothing to do with the word. That's because you're making an observation that they're boring and unexciting, and that's the part that hurts. So that adheres to the intention, not the word.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to give up a perfectly functional word that describes something in the world that I want to describe just because someone might be offended that they're not very interesting.
Yes.
They can just learn how to be more interesting. Yeah, but develop some charisma.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, but it's been used to describe something that's boring and unexciting. They are right when they say that. But it's like, look, sorry, just learn to be less boring and more exciting.
Yes. And perhaps they wouldn't come up with such, I suppose, tedious articles such as this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be a very, very good start, I think. The last two are tone deaf and crippled.
Again, literally descriptive terms that actually have a purpose.
Yes.
If you can't determine a particular kind of musical pitch, you need to know that.
Yes.
And if you are crippled, that literally means you have a limb that doesn't work.
Okay. Tone is a matter of musical expression. To not be able to hear a certain matter or certain type of musical expression is actually a form of deafness.
But they're acting like these words are moral judgments, and they're not moral judgments. And even in ancient times when the word crippled is used, it's not like to say, well, that person's a bad person because they're crippled. It's just to say, well, something unfortunate has happened to them.
They're not moral judgments, but the important part is that they must be for them.
But it's interesting how they say, well, maybe I would use disability or mobility issue. Well, how is that going to accrue any less intonation on the term in exchange for crippled? I mean, crippled to them only sounds like a bad word because it describes something that's negative. You say, we're going to use a different word that doesn't have the same connotations, which is going to be mobility issue. That's just going to end up being crippled. Like the new crippled is going to be, mobility issue. If for some reason you happen to say it that way, but that's ridiculous.
But then you can start taking offense to the word mobility.
Exactly.
Yes, if you happen to be immobile in any way at all.
Exactly. The word itself is merely a token that symbolizes the meaning into which we infuse it. Changing the token without changing the meaning doesn't make the word less offensive.
Yeah. Offence, in short, is indeterminate. You cannot objectify it in words. Stop policing our thoughts. Go away.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site.
We've got loads on there, and it's all really, really good. For example, we have regular premium articles that discuss contemporary events, and we have an audio track for our silver and gold tier members. And of course, we have our regular series on there. We've got Contemplations, which is Josh and whoever he wants to have talk to him about a particular topic. On this one, he's talking about talking to Bo, about in-group preference. Moving on. Bo and myself also do the Epoch series, which says talking about history. This one's Belisarius Part 3, because Belisarius was a 6th century Byzantine general, and he had an amazing career and a genuinely tragic end. And the myth of him is old blind Belisarius begging on the streets of Rome would have been better than what happened to him, but I won't spoil it. I'll let you I'll let you find out. And of course, we do our regular book club as well this week's or this month's. I don't know how often we do them actually. Fairly regularly. It takes a while to read a book. But this is Callum doing John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, in which I rail against utilitarianism. I used to be a huge fan of John Stuart Mill, like 5-10 years ago. And since then, I've really soured on utilitarianism. And so the framing of his arguments, I find kind of insufferable. He's not wrong in what he's arguing for, but it's the way he's doing it. But anyway, we also do a bunch of premium podcasts, things that are entertaining, we think, like the politics of Star Trek that I did with John, talking about, well, is Star Trek a socialist paradise or not? It turns out it's not, but it's something different. Post-scarcity liberalism, basically. But that's a really good podcast. And we also have to put up things on the website that we can't actually put on YouTube because YouTube has editorial policies about things such as where all these heart attacks are coming from. Giant elephant in the room. It's probably climate change. Don't worry about it. We also have fascinating interviews from really interesting people, such as this one, which is an activist called Luke Avery, who's a Christian, but don't worry, he's not Bible thumping in this. What he's doing is talking about the ancient wisdom in the biblical book of Proverbs, and it's very much daddist sort of stuff, and I really enjoyed doing this one. And I think I'll have him back in, hopefully, to do another one, Ecclesiastes or something, and hopefully we'll do another one soon.
And if you want to keep up with us, you can follow us on Ghetto.com. I love the phrase and Ghetto doing, something like that, I don't know.
You're doing really well on there, though, aren't you? You've got like 11,000 followers.
So come follow me on Ghetto, come follow you on Ghetto.
Yeah. And lotuses.com on Ghetto.
Lotuses_com on there. Let's go check that out. And also the conference itself. So this is a conference being put on by the Ghetto guys. This is on the December the 8th. So update on this, the Ghetto conference has been postponed until further notice. We will let people know as soon as we have more information. Apparently it was postponed thanks to the global freakout in response to the Omicron variant. So sorry about that. So if you'd like to get access to all that premium content, you can subscribe at lotuseaters.com. Thank you and goodbye.